The sun beat down on Dust Bowl Gulch, baking the already parched earth. Jedediah, a man weathered like an old fence post, squinted at his struggling cattle. His ranch, the Double J, was more like the Double Trouble these days. He'd inherited it from his pa, and his pa from his pa before that. But this year, the rains hadn't come, and the bank was breathing down his neck. Jedediah needed help, strong backs and willing hands. But money was tighter than a drum. He couldn't afford to hire anyone, not even a scrawny farmhand. Loneliness was a constant companion, second only to the worry gnawing at his gut. He ate supper alone, walked the fields alone, and dreamed of a life that felt less empty. He remembered his ma always saying, "A house ain't a home without laughter." The Double J hadn't heard laughter in years. Then, the flyer appeared on the town notice board, labor auction, widow and 5 sons. Jedediah scoffed. An auction for people? Felt wrong, desperate. But as he read the details, a flicker of hope ignited within him. Sarah Miller, recently widowed, and her 5 boys, ranging from little tykes to sturdy teenagers, were being offered up to the highest bidder to pay off her late husband's debts. Jedediah wrestled with his conscience. He wasn't sure about the morality of it all, but the thought of those boys working his land, bringing life back to the Double J, was too tempting to ignore. And there was something about Sarah's picture, a quiet strength in her eyes, that tugged at his heart. He knew he had to go. He had to at least see. Maybe, just maybe, this auction was the answer to his prayers. Or maybe, it would just be another heartbreak in a long line of them. Meanwhile, miles away, Sarah Miller faced a different kind of storm. Her husband, Thomas, a good man but a poor businessman, had left behind a mountain of debt. Now, the bank was calling in their dues, and with no money to pay, they were resorting to the unthinkable, auctioning off her and her son's labor. Sarah tried to remain strong for her boys, but fear gnawed at her. How could she protect them? What kind of life awaited them, being bought and sold like farm equipment? Her eldest, 15-year-old Caleb, tried to be brave, but she saw the worry in his eyes. 10-year-old Samuel clung to her hand, his face pale. Little Billy, just 5, didn't understand what was happening, but he sensed the tension and whimpered softly. The twins, 8-year-old Daniel and David, usually full of mischief, were uncharacteristically quiet. She packed their meager belongings, a few clothes, some family photos, and a worn-out Bible. Her heart ached with the injustice of it all. Thomas had always dreamed of a better life for them, a life of security and happiness. Now, his dreams were shattered, and she was left to pick up the pieces, trying to shield her sons from the harsh realities of the world. As they rode in the back of a borrowed wagon towards Dust Bowl Gulch, Sarah whispered a prayer. She prayed for strength, for guidance, and for a miracle. She didn't know what awaited them, but she knew she had to be brave. For her sons, she would face whatever came, even if it meant being sold to a stranger. Their future depended on it. The Dust Bowl Gulch town square was bustling, a grim carnival atmosphere hanging in the air. Farmers, merchants, and curious onlookers gathered, their faces a mix of pity and morbid fascination. Jedediah stood at the edge of the crowd, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. He felt a wave of anger wash over him. This wasn't right. People weren't livestock to be bought and sold. Then he saw them. Sarah and her sons were ushered onto a makeshift stage. Sarah, though weary, stood tall, her eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. The boys huddled around her, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Caleb, the eldest, tried to shield his younger siblings from the judging eyes. A portly man in a dusty suit, the town's banker, cleared his throat and began the auction. He spoke of their skills, their willingness to work, painting a picture of valuable laborers. The bidding started low, hesitant. Jedediah watched, his stomach churning. He hadn't planned on bidding, but he couldn't stand by and watch them be exploited. As the price slowly climbed, Jedediah felt a surge of determination. He thought of the Double J, the empty rooms, the silent evenings. He thought of Sarah's weary eyes and the boys' frightened faces. He knew what he had to do. When the banker called for a final offer, Jedediah stepped forward, his voice booming across the square. He made a bid that silenced the crowd, a bid that surprised even himself. All eyes turned to him, the lonely rancher, the man who barely spoke a word. He had just bought a family. The ride to the Double J was silent. Sarah and her sons sat huddled in the back of Jedediah's rickety wagon, their faces unreadable. Jedediah, usually a man of few words, found himself even more tongue-tied than usual. He glanced back at them occasionally, trying to gauge their reactions. Were they scared? Angry? Relieved? He couldn't tell. The ranch house loomed in the distance, a sprawling but weathered structure. It wasn't much to look at, but it was solid, sturdy. Jedediah hoped it would be enough. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and hopped down, offering a hand to Sarah. She hesitated for a moment before accepting it, her touch brief but firm. "Welcome to the Double J," Jedediah said, his voice gruff. "It ain't much, but it's home." Sarah nodded, her eyes taking in the surroundings. The boys piled out of the wagon, their eyes wide with curiosity and apprehension. Caleb helped his younger siblings, his protective instincts kicking in. Jedediah showed them inside. The house was sparsely furnished but clean. He'd done his best to tidy up before their arrival, but it still felt empty. He assigned them rooms, Sarah getting the master bedroom, the boys sharing the others. That first night, supper was a quiet affair. Jedediah cooked a simple meal of beans and biscuits. The boys ate politely, their eyes darting around the room. Sarah offered a small, grateful smile. Jedediah knew this was just the beginning. The real work, the work of building trust and understanding, was yet to come. He just hoped he was up to the task. This new arrangement felt fragile, like a house of cards. He didn't want it to fall apart. The next morning, Jedediah laid out the ground rules. "Everyone works," he stated plainly. "The older boys will help with the cattle and the fields. Sarah, you can tend to the garden and the chickens. Little ones can help with chores around the house." He assigned tasks with a no-nonsense attitude, but his voice wasn't unkind. Caleb and Samuel were assigned to mucking out the stables, a job they tackled with surprising enthusiasm. The twins, Daniel and David, helped Jedediah mend fences, their youthful energy a welcome change from his usual solitary labor. Even little Billy tried to help, though his efforts mostly involved chasing chickens and getting in the way. Sarah, meanwhile, surveyed the neglected garden with a practiced eye. Weeds choked the vegetables, and the soil was dry and cracked. But she saw potential. She began to clear the weeds, her hands moving with a quiet determination. Jedediah watched them, a flicker of something akin to pride in his eyes. They were hard workers, each contributing in their own way. But the awkwardness remained. The boys were hesitant to speak to him, and Sarah kept a polite distance. He knew it would take time for them to adjust, to trust him. He just had to be patient and keep providing. He noticed Billy struggling to carry a bucket of water to the chickens. Jedediah knelt down and helped him, showing him how to balance the bucket. Billy looked up at him, his eyes wide with gratitude. For a moment, Jedediah saw a glimpse of something beyond fear and uncertainty. He saw a child who needed help, who needed a father figure. The thought resonated within him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Days turned into weeks, and the Double J slowly began to transform. The boys' hard work was making a noticeable difference. Caleb, with his growing strength, proved to be a natural with the cattle, quickly learning how to herd and care for them. Samuel, quiet but observant, had a knack for fixing things. He could mend a broken fence, repair a leaky pipe, or even coax a sputtering engine back to life. The twins, Daniel and David, brought a much-needed dose of energy and laughter to the ranch. They raced through the fields, chased after stray animals, and generally made a joyful commotion wherever they went. Jedediah found himself smiling more often, even chuckling at their antics. Even little Billy, despite his age, found ways to contribute. He helped Sarah gather eggs, weed the garden, and kept the chickens fed. He was always eager to please, his small face beaming with pride whenever he completed a task. Sarah's garden flourished under her care. Fresh vegetables and herbs filled the table, adding color and flavor to their meals. She also started mending clothes and patching up the worn-out curtains, making the house feel more like a home. The tension that had initially hung heavy in the air began to dissipate. The boys started to relax, to laugh, to be themselves. They still respected Jedediah, but their fear was replaced with a growing sense of trust. They were becoming a family, not by blood, but by shared labor, shared meals, and shared hardships. The Double J, once a symbol of loneliness and struggle, was slowly becoming a place of hope and belonging. Jedediah, despite his gruff exterior, began to show small acts of kindness that gradually chipped away at the boys' reserve. He noticed Daniel's favorite toy, a wooden horse, was broken. Without a word, he took it to his workshop and spent an evening carefully gluing it back together. Daniel's face lit up when he saw it, his eyes wide with gratitude. He saw Caleb watching him work with the horses, a longing in his eyes. One afternoon, Jedediah called Caleb over and showed him how to properly saddle a horse. Then, he let him ride, guiding him gently, offering tips and encouragement. Caleb's face beamed with pride as he rode around the corral, feeling a sense of accomplishment he'd never known before. He even started making small changes to the meals. He knew the boys missed their ma's cooking, so he asked Sarah about her recipes. He learned how to make her famous apple pie, a sweet treat that brought smiles to everyone's faces. He always made sure there was enough for seconds and even thirds. These small gestures, these unspoken acts of kindness, spoke volumes. The boys began to see Jedediah not just as their employer, but as someone who cared about them, someone who was looking out for them. Sarah, too, noticed the changes in Jedediah, the softening of his features, the warmth in his eyes. She began to see him not just as a gruff rancher, but as a good man, a man with a kind heart hidden beneath a rough exterior. The Double J was slowly transforming into something more than just a ranch. It was becoming a home, filled with warmth, laughter, and love. One evening, the sky turned an ominous shade of purple. The wind howled, whipping the trees into a frenzy. A storm, unlike anything they'd seen before, was brewing. Jedediah knew they were in trouble. He gathered everyone inside, his voice urgent. "We need to secure the livestock," he said. "Caleb, Samuel, you're with me." The three of them braved the wind and rain, struggling to herd the cattle into the barn. Lightning flashed, illuminating the terrified animals. The wind tore at their clothes, and the rain stung their faces. It was a battle against nature, a desperate attempt to save what they had. Meanwhile, inside the house, Sarah worked tirelessly to keep the younger boys calm. The twins were huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Little Billy clung to Sarah, his body trembling. She read them stories, sang them songs, anything to distract them from the storm raging outside. A tree branch crashed through a window, sending shards of glass flying. Sarah quickly ushered the boys into the cellar, where they huddled together, waiting for the storm to pass. After hours of relentless rain and wind, the storm finally began to subside. Jedediah, Caleb, and Samuel returned to the house, soaked to the bone and exhausted. They had managed to save most of the cattle, but the ranch had suffered damage. Sarah emerged from the cellar, her face etched with worry. She quickly assessed their injuries, tending to cuts and bruises with gentle hands. The storm had tested them, pushed them to their limits, but it had also brought them closer, forging a bond of resilience and shared experience. They had faced the storm together, and they had survived. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of destruction, but also a sense of unity. Jedediah, exhausted but relieved, stood in the doorway, watching Sarah tend to the boys. His clothes were torn, his face was streaked with mud, but his heart felt strangely full. Little Billy, still shaken from the storm, ran towards Jedediah, his small arms outstretched. He buried his face in Jedediah's leg, clinging to him tightly. Then, in a small, trembling voice, he said the words that would change everything. "Dad, I was scared." Jedediah froze, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't expected that, He hadn't even dared to dream of it. He looked down at Billy, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and overwhelming tenderness. He gently knelt down and wrapped his arms around the boy, holding him close. "It's okay, Billy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The storm is over. You're safe now." He held Billy tightly, feeling the small body tremble against him. He knew that this moment, this simple act of comfort, was more significant than anything he had ever done before. Sarah watched from across the room, her eyes filled with tears. She saw the connection between Jedediah and Billy, a bond that had been forged in the crucible of the storm. She knew that something had shifted, something profound. The Double J was no longer just a ranch. It was becoming a family, bound together by love, loyalty, and a shared sense of belonging. And Jedediah, the lonely rancher, was finally becoming a father. Jedediah wasn't used to affection. He'd lived a solitary life for so long that displays of love and tenderness felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. But as he held Billy close, something shifted within him. The gruff exterior he had cultivated for so many years began to crumble, revealing the kind, gentle heart that had been buried beneath layers of loneliness and hardship. He didn't know what to say, how to react. He just held Billy tighter, stroking his hair awkwardly. He felt a lump forming in his throat, tears welling up in his eyes. He hadn't cried in years, not since his pa had passed away. But now, the tears flowed freely, a release of pent-up emotion. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes pleading for understanding. She smiled at him, a warm, encouraging smile that told him everything he needed to know. She understood. She saw the transformation that was taking place within him. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Come on, Billy," he said, his voice still rough but softened with affection. "Let's get you cleaned up and into bed." He picked Billy up, carrying him inside the house. As he tucked Billy into bed, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known existed. He looked at the sleeping boy, his face angelic in the soft light. He knew that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just Jedediah, the lonely rancher. He was a father, a protector, a provider, and he wouldn't have it any other way. He had a family now, and he would do everything in his power to keep them safe and happy. This was his purpose, his reason for being. And it all started with one small boy calling him Dad. Sarah watched Jedediah tuck Billy into bed, her heart swelling with emotion. She had seen the transformation in him, the softening of his features, the warmth in his eyes. She knew that he wasn't just a gruff rancher anymore. He was becoming a father, a caregiver, a source of love and support for her sons. She realized that a genuine connection was forming between Jedediah and her boys. It wasn't just about labor or obligation. It was about something deeper, something more meaningful. They were finding a sense of belonging, a sense of family, in this unlikely arrangement. She thought about her late husband, Thomas, a good man but not always the strongest. Jedediah, on the other hand, possessed a quiet strength, a resilience that inspired confidence. She knew that her sons needed a strong male figure in their lives, someone to guide them, to teach them, to protect them. And she was beginning to believe that Jedediah could be that person. She also realized that she was developing feelings for Jedediah, feelings she hadn't expected. She admired his kindness, his generosity, his unwavering commitment to her and her sons. She saw a goodness in him that resonated with her own values and beliefs. As Jedediah emerged from Billy's room, Sarah met his gaze. She saw a vulnerability in his eyes, a longing for connection. She stepped forward and gently took his hand, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through both of them. "Thank you, Jedediah," she said, her voice soft, "for everything." He squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah," he said. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me." The storm had brought destruction, but it had also brought them together, forging a bond that would last a lifetime. The days that followed were filled with a newfound sense of peace and harmony. A comfortable rhythm settled over the Double J. Jedediah, now embraced as a father figure, became more involved in the boys' lives. He helped Caleb with his horsemanship, teaching him advanced riding techniques and sharing stories of his own youth. He encouraged Samuel's tinkering, providing him with tools and materials to build and invent. He spent hours playing games with the twins, Daniel and David, their laughter echoing through the fields. He even started reading bedtime stories to Billy, his voice gruff but gentle as he narrated tales of adventure and bravery. The boys thrived under Jedediah's guidance. They excelled in their chores, their confidence growing with each passing day. They were no longer just workers on a ranch. They were part of a family, loved and supported. Sarah, too, flourished in this new environment. She continued to tend to her garden, her hands bringing life and beauty to the land. She and Jedediah worked side by side, their bond deepening with each shared task. They found solace in each other's company, their conversations filled with laughter, understanding, and a growing sense of love. Jedediah started taking them into town on Saturdays. He'd buy the boys candy and Sarah a new bonnet. They'd all pile into the wagon, singing songs and telling stories. For the first time in a long time, Jedediah felt like he belonged. He had a family, a home, and a purpose. The Double J was no longer just a ranch. It was a haven, a sanctuary, a place where love bloomed and families grew. The bank's threat felt distant, almost forgotten. The Double J was alive again, filled with the sounds of laughter and the warmth of love. News of the transformation at the Double J spread through Dust Bowl Gulch like wildfire. The townsfolk, initially skeptical of Jedediah's intentions, began to see the positive impact he was having on Sarah and her sons. They witnessed the boys thriving, the ranch flourishing, and Jedediah himself becoming a happier, more engaged member of the community. Inspired by this heartwarming story, the town decided to organize a potluck dinner to officially welcome Sarah and her sons. Tables laden with food were set up in the town square, a testament to the generosity and goodwill of the community. Jedediah, Sarah, and the boys arrived in their wagon, dressed in their Sunday best. Jedediah felt a surge of pride as he looked at his family, his heart swelling with love. As they stepped down from the wagon, they were greeted by cheers and applause. The townsfolk lined up to offer their congratulations and welcome them to the community. Jedediah stood proudly beside Sarah and the boys, his arm around her shoulder. He had never felt so accepted, so loved. He had finally found his place in the world, surrounded by the people who mattered most to him. The potluck was a resounding success. The food was delicious, the company was warm, and the atmosphere was filled with joy and laughter. Jedediah watched as the boys played games with the other children, their faces beaming with happiness. He saw Sarah chatting with the other women, her eyes sparkling with contentment. He realized that he had not only saved the Double J but had also found a family, a community, and a love that he had never thought possible. He was no longer the lonely rancher struggling to survive. He was a father, a provider, a member of a loving community. He belonged. Jedediah stood on the porch of the Double J, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. He was no longer the same man who had stood on that same porch months ago, a lonely, struggling rancher facing an uncertain future. He was a father, a partner, a member of a loving community. He had found a purpose beyond just surviving. He had found a reason to wake up each morning, a reason to work hard, a reason to smile. He had found a family. The Double J was no longer just a ranch. It was a symbol of hope, of resilience, of the power of love to transform lives. It was a place where broken hearts could heal, where lost souls could find belonging, where dreams could come true. He looked over at Sarah, who was sitting on the porch swing, reading a book to Billy. Her face was radiant, her eyes sparkling with happiness. He walked over and sat beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "for giving me a second chance, for giving me a family." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart swelling with love. "We didn't give you anything, Jedediah," she said. "You gave us everything. You gave us a home, a family, and a future." They sat in silence for a moment watching the sunset. The Double J was bathed in a warm, golden light, a testament to the love and happiness that had taken root there. Jedediah knew that their journey was just beginning, but he was confident that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, as long as they had each other. He was finally home. The romance between Sarah and Jedediah blossomed slowly, like a delicate flower reaching for the sun. It wasn't a whirlwind of passion, but a gentle unfolding of mutual respect, shared responsibility, and a deep appreciation for each other's strengths. They found joy in the simple things, working side by side in the garden, sharing a quiet moment on the porch swing, exchanging knowing glances across the dinner table. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond practical matters to encompass their hopes, their dreams, and their fears. Jedediah admired Sarah's strength, her resilience, her unwavering love for her sons. He saw her as a partner, an equal, someone he could rely on to face whatever challenges life threw their way. Sarah, in turn, admired Jedediah's kindness, his generosity, his newfound ability to express his emotions. She saw him as a protector, a provider, and a loving father to her boys. Their connection was built on a foundation of shared values and a mutual desire to create a loving home for their family. They supported each other's dreams, encouraged each other's growth, and celebrated each other's successes. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Jedediah reached for Sarah's hand. Their fingers intertwined, a silent acknowledgement of the love that had grown between them. "Sarah," Jedediah said, his voice soft with affection. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I care for you deeply." Sarah smiled, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "I care for you too, Jedediah," she said. "More than words can say." They shared a tender kiss, a promise of a future filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams. Their subtle romance was a testament to the power of love to bloom in the most unexpected of places. The sun shone brightly on the Double J, casting a warm glow on the bustling ranch. Jedediah and Sarah stood side by side, watching their family work together, a sense of contentment washing over them. Caleb and Samuel were herding cattle, their skills honed by months of practice and Jedediah's expert guidance. The twins, Daniel and David, were mending fences, their laughter echoing through the fields. Little Billy was helping Sarah in the garden, his small hands carefully planting seeds. The Double J was thriving. The cattle were healthy, the crops were plentiful, and the bank was no longer breathing down their necks. They had weathered the storm, both literally and figuratively, and had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. Jedediah looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with love. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. They had built a life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams. The future stretched before them, bright and promising. They knew that there would be challenges along the way, but they were confident that they could face them together, as a family. The scene faded out, showing the family working together, happy and secure. The Double J was no longer just a ranch. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place where love bloomed and families grew. The ranch was saved, and everyone had found a home, a future filled with hope, and a love that would last a lifetime. The laughter of children filled the air, a testament to the power of kindness, compassion, and the enduring strength of family. It was a perfect ending to a perfect story.